On a cold December evening in 2010, the vibrant city of Bristol, England, was alive with the festive spirit of Christmas. But for one young woman, a casual night out would tragically become her last. The evening of Friday, December 17, 2010, was crisp and cold in Bristol, the kind of night where Christmas lights twinkle brightly against a dark sky, promising a festive cheer. For 25-year-old Joanna Yates, it was the start of a weekend she had been looking forward to, despite a slight tinge of apprehension. She had just spent a couple of hours at the Bristol Ram pub with her colleagues from the landscape architecture firm where she worked. The atmosphere was warm and convivial, filled with the laughter and easy banter of a team unwinding before the holidays. Joanna, described by those who knew her as modest, conscientious, and laid-back, was in good spirits, but she had mentioned to her friends that she wasn't entirely thrilled about spending the coming days alone. Her live-in boyfriend, Greg Reardon, had traveled north to Sheffield to visit his family for the weekend. Their flat at 44 Canninge Road in the leafy, affluent suburb of Clifton would be quiet without him. Yet, she had plans to fill the time. She intended to get a head start on her Christmas shopping and, more endearingly, she wanted to do some baking. She and Greg were scheduled to host their own Christmas party for friends and family the following week, and Joanna was determined to have homemade mince pies ready for the occasion. It was a simple, domestic ambition that spoke volumes about her character. She was a young woman building a life, rooted in her relationship and her career, looking forward to the future. She left the pub around 8 p.m., giving farewells and likely expecting to see everyone again soon. She pulled her coat tight against the chill outside and began the 30-minute walk home. Her route was a familiar one, through streets she had walked many times since moving into the flat with Greg just 2 months prior, in October. The couple was settled and happy. They had met in 2008 at their architecture firm and had moved in together in 2009, with their relationship a solid and central part of both their lives. The flat itself was part of a large, grand Victorian house that had been subdivided. They occupied one of the ground-floor units, with another couple living in the adjacent flat, and the landlord, Christopher Jeffries, residing in the upstairs portion. The city was alive with the energy of a Friday night, but her path would take her towards the quieter, residential streets of Clifton. Every step she took was being documented by the unblinking eyes of the city's CCTV network, creating a haunting timeline of her final moments of freedom. The sequence of events between 8 p.m. and approximately 8:50 p.m. that night is etched into the official record, a stark timeline built from cold, hard evidence. After leaving the Bristol Ram, Joanna's movements were captured by a series of CCTV cameras, creating a ghostly digital footprint. At 8:10 p.m., she was recorded on the security system of a Waitrose supermarket. The footage showed her entering and then leaving a short time later without making any purchases. 20 minutes later, at 8:30 p.m., she spoke to her best friend, Rebecca Scott. The content of that conversation was, by all accounts, perfectly normal and upbeat. They discussed their plans for Christmas Eve, a time for close friends and family to come together. About 10 minutes after that call, at 8:40 p.m., she stopped at a Tesco Express. Here, the CCTV shows her getting tomato, mozzarella, and basil pesto pizza, a simple, easy dinner for one. She paid for it and then, just a few doors down, she went into a shop called the Bargain Booze and bought 2 small bottles of cider. This was her Friday night treat, a pizza and a drink to enjoy in her quiet flat. The last confirmed sighting of Joanna Yates alive came from a camera mounted on a public house, which captured her image as she walked along the road that led directly to Canninge Road. Based on her pace and the distance, investigators estimated she would have arrived at the gate of 44 Canninge Road around 8:50 p.m. It is believed she walked up the driveway, let herself into the ground-floor flat, and closed the door behind her. From this point onward, the clear, factual timeline dissolves into mystery and speculation. The world outside continued on, completely unaware that within the walls of that unassuming flat, something terrible was happening. The weekend passed with an unsettling silence for those trying to reach Joanna. Greg, away in Sheffield, tried calling and texting her multiple times, growing increasingly concerned when his messages went unanswered. This was completely out of character. Joanna was reliable and communicative, especially with Greg. He finally returned to Bristol around 8 p.m. on Sunday, December 19th. The moment he stepped into their flat, his fears were realized. The place was dark and silent, not with the quiet of an empty home, but with a heavy, ominous stillness. He found Joanna's coat hanging in the hallway. When he called her mobile phone, it rang from within the pocket of that same coat. Her keys were inside the flat. Her purse, with her money and cards, was there. Her glasses, which she needed for daily life, were left behind. Their cat, Bernard, was meowing plaintively, showing clear signs of having been neglected and unfed for the entire weekend. Every single item a person would need to leave the house voluntarily was accounted for and left behind. It was a scene that screamed that something was profoundly wrong. After a period of frantic waiting and checking, hoping she might suddenly appear, he made two of the most difficult calls of his life. At 12:45 a.m. on Monday, December 20th, he first contacted the police to officially report Joanna missing. Then, he had to call her parents, David and Teresa Yates, to deliver the devastating news that their daughter had vanished. The police response was swift and serious. The discovery of all her personal belongings immediately elevated the case from a simple missing person report to a potential abduction or worse. Detectives arriving at the scene would have noted the same disturbing clues that Greg had: the untouched advent calendar, with the doors for the 17th and 18th still closed, a small but telling detail of a routine abruptly interrupted. Her baking apron was found discarded on the floor. There was no sign of a break-in, no evidence of a frantic struggle in the main living areas. This pointed to a terrifying possibility, that Joanna had opened the door to someone she knew, or at least someone she did not perceive as an immediate threat. The investigation quickly scaled up, eventually involving 80 detectives and civilian staff, becoming one of the largest operations in the history of Avon and Somerset police. As the investigation unfolded through that week, the public became increasingly captivated and concerned by the story of the missing young landscape architect. Greg and Joanna's friends set up a website to coordinate search efforts and share information, a digital testament to the vast network of people who loved her and were desperate for her safe return. The police, following thousands of leads and examining over 100 hours of seized CCTV footage, were exhausting every possible avenue, yet no clear picture emerged. The mystery of what happened between 8:50 p.m. on the 17th and Greg's return on the 19th deepened with each passing day. On December 21st, just 4 days after her disappearance, Joanna's parents, David and Teresa Yates, stood before a bank of cameras at a police press conference. Their faces were etched with a pain that was visceral and raw, a stark contrast to the sterile, official setting. Her mother made a direct, heartfelt appeal to her daughter, a plea that would be replayed across the nation. David Yates gave voice to the fear that was hardening into a grim certainty for the investigators. He stated he believed his daughter had been abducted from the flat itself. He emphasized that Christmas was her favorite time of year. Another press conference was held on December 23rd, broadcast nationally on Sky News and the BBC, with the family's anguish visibly deepening as the days ticked closer to Christmas. Then, on the morning of December 25th, Christmas Day, the news everyone had been dreading finally arrived. A couple, taking their dog for a walk on Longwood Lane in Fale Ann, a rural area about 3 miles from Clifton, spotted something unusual on a small grass verge at the side of the road. Partially concealed by a layer of leaves and a recent dusting of snow, they discovered the fully clothed body of a young woman, and it was Joanna Yates. The location was isolated, and it was immediately clear the body had been deliberately placed there and then camouflaged. The discovery on Christmas Day, a time synonymous with family, joy, and children's excitement, added an almost unimaginable layer of cruelty to the tragedy. Police immediately secured the scene. The crime scene manager made a critical, forensic-minded decision, not to erect a tent over the body. The freezing temperatures had preserved the scene perfectly, and a tent would raise the ambient temperature, potentially causing the snow to melt and wash away fragile but crucial evidence. They worked meticulously in the bitter cold. Joanna was found in a fetal position. One of her socks was missing, but her bare foot was clean, and the sock on her other foot was free of dirt or debris. This was a crucial detail. It meant she had not walked to that spot through the winter landscape. She had been transported there, most likely in a vehicle. A spot of blood was discovered high up on a nearby wall, suggesting the killer had tried and failed to lift her body over it to conceal it in the quarry on the other side of the wall. The forensic hunt for the killer had now begun at the most heartbreaking of crime scenes, on a day that should have been filled with peace. The post-mortem examination confirmed the worst fears. Joanna Yates had been murdered. The pathologist delivered a clinical yet devastating report, determining the official cause of death was strangulation. The report further detailed that she had sustained a total of 43 separate injuries to her head, neck, torso, and arms. The autopsy also confirmed a fact that seemed both trivial and deeply significant in the context of her final evening. She had never eaten the pizza she had bought with such mundane anticipation. There was no evidence to suggest she had been sexually assaulted. Alongside the physical evidence of the attack, the forensic team made a discovery that would become the absolute cornerstone of the case. They recovered a sample of unknown male DNA from Joanna's body. It was found specifically on the back of her jeans and on areas of her bare skin. This DNA did not belong to Greg Reardon, and the killer had left a biological calling card. With this unique genetic profile in hand, the investigation narrowed its focus with razor precision to a single monumental task: finding the man who matched it. The circumstances of the crime now pointed strongly to someone Joanna knew, or at least felt comfortable allowing into her flat so soon after arriving home. It pointed to someone who knew Greg was away for the weekend, leaving Joanna alone. And it pointed decisively to someone who had access to a car to transport her body 3 miles to Longwood Lane. Attention, naturally and urgently, zeroed in on the other residents of 44 Canninge Road. Greg Reardon was quickly and formally eliminated as a suspect. His family provided a solid alibi confirming his presence in Sheffield, which was further supported by independent CCTV evidence for motorways. This elimination turned the investigative spotlight directly onto the other men in the building. The landlord, Christopher Jeffries, became a person of intense interest. He was an eccentric, somewhat theatrical figure, a retired English teacher with a distinctive manner and appearance. Crucially, he held keys to every flat in the house, granting him potential access. He had been present in the building that Friday evening. Most importantly, he had personally helped Greg jumpstart his car before he left for Sheffield, a casual interaction that meant he knew with certainty that Joanna would be spending the weekend alone. His alibi was weak, resting solely on his own claim that he was in his upstairs flat alone all night. On December 30th, based on this circumstantial but compelling logic, police arrested Christopher Jeffries on suspicion of Joanna's murder. The arrest triggered an immediate and voracious media frenzy. His name, though not officially released by the police, was quickly discovered and splashed across front pages by journalists. The press vividly portrayed him as a strange, lewd, and creepy figure, who was now public enemy number 1. However, while Jeffries was in custody, the scientific evidence began to tell a very different story. His DNA was tested and did not match the critical profile found on Joanna's body. A thorough and invasive search of his car and his flat yielded no forensic links to the crime whatsoever. A pair of his gym shoes were discovered hidden under a kitchen cabinet with a spot of blood, but the DNA profile obtained from it was of insufficient quality for a definitive match, and it was not linked to Joanna. With no physical evidence connecting him to the murder, Christopher Jeffries was released from police custody at 9 p.m. on New Year's Day. The investigation, which had seemed so close to a resolution with a dramatic arrest, was suddenly back at a devastating and humbling beginning. The real killer remained at large, unidentified, and the pressure on the police mounted exponentially. With Christopher Jeffries officially eliminated and released from custody, the investigation found itself at a frustrating and very public standstill. The media, which had so confidently pointed the finger at the eccentric landlord, was now left scrambling, and the police faced intense scrutiny. But during the intense and highly publicized scrutiny on Jeffries, another resident of 44, Canninge Road had subtly, and perhaps cleverly, inserted himself into the inquiry. Vincent Tabak, the 32-year-old Dutch architectural engineer who lived with his girlfriend, Tanya Morrison, in the ground-floor flat adjacent to Joanna and Greg's, had initially presented himself as a peripheral figure. He had told police he barely knew the couple, citing that he had been out of the country for work until December 11th, just days before the murder. However, on December 30th, the same day Jeffries was arrested, Tabak proactively called the police. He offered what seemed, on the surface, to be a helpful piece of information. He claimed he had seen Jeffries' car parked in a different position on the morning of December 18th, suggesting it had been moved during the night. The call was noted, and given the gravity of the case, an officer was dispatched to Holland on New Year's Eve to take a formal, video-recorded statement from Tabak while he was visiting his family. It was during this official interview that the officer's instincts were triggered. Tabak seemed to have an unusual, almost academic interest in the forensic and procedural aspects of the case. He asked detailed questions about the investigation that seemed to go beyond casual curiosity, while simultaneously being evasive on other points. His story also began to shift in subtle ways, from initially stating he was home all evening until picking up Tanya from her work party at 2 a.m., he now recalled making 2 brief, solo trips out, once to take photographs of the snowy landscape and another time to go to a grocery store. This evolving narrative was a red flag. The police, as part of their wider screening process of individuals connected to the victim, then asked Tabak to voluntarily provide a DNA sample. It was at this direct request that his behavior became more significant. He suddenly changed his account again, now claiming he had, in fact, been inside Joanna's flat on a previous occasion to speak with the landlord, Chris Jeffries. This calculated, evolving narrative raised his profile from a mere witness to a serious person of interest. Then, on January 2, 2011, came the definitive, case-breaking breakthrough. The Forensic Science Service informed the investigation that the unknown male DNA recovered from Joanna Yates's body was a match for Vincent Tabak. Detectives began urgently reviewing and re-examining CCTV footage with this new focus and found clear images of Tabak's car, a distinctive light-colored Nissan Note, traveling across the Clifton Suspension Bridge in the direction of Longwood Lane around the critical time Joanna's body was dumped. On January 20th, in a meticulously planned and massively resourced operation designed specifically to avoid the media circus that had surrounded Jeffries' arrest, police moved in. They arrested Vincent Tabak at his home in the early hours. The operation involved closing surrounding streets, instating a temporary no-fly zone overhead, and erecting large screens around the property to shield the arrest from view. The man who had presented a facade of normalcy and cooperation was now in custody for murder. The search for the truth was now set to delve into the hidden double life of a man nobody suspected. Once Vincent Tabak was in custody, investigators gained unfettered access to his digital world, and what they uncovered painted a portrait of a man with a deeply disturbing secret life. His laptop and other electronic devices were subjected to a thorough forensic examination, and the search history revealed a suspect who was obsessively monitoring the very crime he had committed. In the days after the murder, but before Joanna's body was discovered and made public on Christmas Day, Tabak had used Google Maps to conduct a street view search of Longwood Lane. He had zoomed in and panned the virtual camera to look directly at the exact grass verge where he had left her body. On that same day, His searches included terms like forensics, body decomposition, and simply Joe Bristol. This indicated a cold, calculating mind, simultaneously checking the public news flow for any mention of the discovery while privately researching how long it might take for evidence to degrade and how to avoid detection. Even more damning than the search history was the massive collection of extreme pornography stored on his hard drive. These were not standard adult videos. They featured women being subjected to brutal violence and, with chilling specificity, numerous acts of strangulation. This material provided a compelling motive that the prosecution would later argue was at the heart of the crime: sexual gratification intrinsically linked to violent domination and the act of choking. This secret digital dungeon stood in stark, horrifying contrast to the public persona of the shy, successful, and respectable engineer. While the specific content of this violent pornography was ultimately deemed too prejudicial to be presented to the jury, it solidified the investigators' core belief that this was a sexually motivated murder, not a tragic accident arising from a misread signal. A microscopic analysis of his car, the Nissan Note, yielded critical results. In the trunk, forensic experts found multiple textile fibers that precisely matched the distinctive clothing Joanna Yates was wearing when she disappeared. They also found a single fiber that matched the bedding from her flat. Furthermore, using sophisticated chemical reagents and alternate light sources, they discovered a minute, almost invisible sample of blood that was confirmed through DNA testing to be Joanna's. The connections worked in reverse as well. When Joanna's own clothing was examined under high-powered microscopes, forensic experts found tiny fibers that matched the unique fabric of Vincent Tabak's coat. This created an unbreakable, two-way forensic web. Her fibers were in his car trunk, and his fibers were on her body. It proved conclusively that Joanna Yates's body had been transported in the trunk of Vincent Tabak's car from her flat on Canninge Road to the isolated dump site on Longwood Lane. Between his self-incriminating digital searches and the irrefutable physical evidence, the case against him was now overwhelming, painting a comprehensive picture of a premeditated act of violence followed by a deliberate and calculated attempt to cover his tracks. Vincent Tabak's trial began at the Central Criminal Court in London, the Old Bailey, on October 4, 2011. He had already entered a plea of guilty to manslaughter, but the prosecution was vigorously pursuing a conviction for murder, arguing he had intended to kill Joanna or at the very least cause her really serious bodily harm. The courtroom became the stage for two starkly different versions of that Friday night, one of cold-blooded murder and one of tragic accident. Tabak himself took the stand in his own defense, a calculated risk to persuade the jury of his narrative. His story was that he had encountered Joanna purely by chance as he was leaving his flat to go to a supermarket. He claimed she had been flirtatious and had invited him into her flat for a drink. He stated that he had misread her friendly signals, tried to kiss her, and when she screamed in reaction, he panicked. He told the jury he then placed his hand over her mouth and neck to silence her, applying what he insisted was minimal force for about 20 seconds, accidentally causing her death. He consistently denied there had been any major struggle, despite the pathologist's evidence detailing 43 separate injuries on her body and the presence of defensive scratches found on his own arms, which he could not convincingly explain. The prosecution, led by Nigel Leclerc, systematically dismantled his account. They highlighted the sheer number and nature of her injuries, her fractured nose, and the fact that one of her earrings was found under her duvet, suggesting the attack had moved from the hallway into the bedroom. They pointed to his calm and calculated actions after the killing, most notably sending a text message to his girlfriend Tanya Morrison stating he was bored, and then going to an Asda supermarket while Joanna's body lay in the trunk of his car just outside, an act they argued was a deliberate move to create a mundane alibi for that period of the evening. Then came one of the most powerful and emotionally draining moments of the entire trial. The prosecutor, seeking to expose the utter absurdity of Tabak's 22nd claim as a brief, panic gesture, asked the defendant, and by extension the entire courtroom, to sit in absolute, uninterrupted silence for the full length of time he said he had strangled Joanna. For 20 seconds, The packed, formal courtroom was completely still and quiet. The silence was deafening, a heavy, palpable force that seemed to swallow the room, a shared, agonizing tribute to the final, terror-filled moments of Joanna's life. It forced everyone present, especially the jury, to viscerally comprehend the sustained duration of that fatal act, to understand that it was not an instantaneous reaction but a prolonged and lethal assault. On October 28, 2011, after deliberating on the evidence, the jury of 6 men and 6 women returned with their verdict. They found Vincent Tabak guilty of murder. Mr. Justice Field sentenced him to life imprisonment, with a minimum tariff of 20 years before he could be considered for parole. For Joanna's family and friends, who had sat through every painful day of the trial, it was the end of the long and harrowing legal battle, but it was not the end of their grief. The bright, promising life of Joanna Yates had been extinguished in a brutal act of violence for the gratification of her neighbor, and the haunting echo of that courtroom silence would forever mark the profound tragedy of her loss. May her gentle soul rest in peace. We have come to the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive. Do well to subscribe if you have not done so, and I will be seeing you on our next episode.